Hi, what's going on guys? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about GraphQL, especially GraphQL Server, and we are going to build a scalable architecture for GraphQL Server. I want to say a little disclaimer, this is not a course for beginners, so I'm not going to talk too much about GraphQL. So if you're looking for a beginner-friendly GraphQL course, you can check some other videos, but if you want to build a scalable GraphQL server, you can stay with me and you can see how we're going to do it. So as you can see over here, GraphQL, let's define it. So GraphQL is a query language for APIs that enables clients to request only the data they need and nothing more. Thanks to ChatGPT for this definition. And basically, in simple words, GraphQL is an alternative to REST API. It's much more scalable, and the client basically can request anything that they want, which means that it's going to be less network traffic between the client and the server. So let's make a quick overview of some of the GraphQL benefits. So GraphQL reduces data transfer. GraphQL provides more flexibility for clients to request data. And GraphQL offers a better developer experience with a strong type system and simplified iterations. I can add another benefit here that is related to developer experience. So in my work, we are using GraphQL and I can say that the developer experience is very nice with the GraphQL playground. I'm basically using the playground over using Postman, which is very convenient and I very enjoy it from the client side. Okay, so before we actually start building the server, let me make a quick note about deprecation in GraphQL packages. So you can see that the GraphQL Server Express package is going to be deprecated, and if you want to create a GraphQL server in 2023 and you want to use the latest version, you're going to use so you're going to use this @Apollo server npm package. So as you can see, the version here is 4.4 at the moment. Alright, let's go to our GraphQL server YouTube folder and let's install some dependencies. So we are going to install Apollo server, Prisma client, course.env, Express and GraphQL, and let's install some dev dependencies. So types for course and Express and Node, Nodeman, Prisma, tsnode and TypeScript. The next thing, we are going to create 3 scripts. In this video, I'm going to use only the dev script, which is going to run our dev environment. And now we're going to configure the tsconfig.json and nodeman.json. Okay, now we're going to create the src folder structure. So we're going to create src folder. Inside that, it's going to have an index.ts file, which is going to be our root file. And we're going to have another folder which is called GraphQL, which is also going to have index.ts file, which is going to be our our GraphQL root file that we're going to export everything we need from this index.ts file. Next, we're going to create some folders here. So we're going to have folders for resolvers, services, type defs, and utils. And now we're going to create a basic Express server. I'm not going to explain too much because it's very basic. So we're just going to bootstrap a server, and you can see that I'm using here a function that I called bootstrap server, and it's going to be async because later we are going to need it in order to start our GraphQL server. So we have this console log that says Express ready at localhost and the port number, and you can see that we have this log printed. And if we go to this URL, we're going to receive hello world message from the server, which means everything is working. The next thing that we're going to do is to initialize Prisma. So I'm going to use Prisma and Docker to run a Postgres database in a container, and I'm going to use Prisma to connect to this database. So in this video, we're going to use the real database to demonstrate the power and the benefits of GraphQL. So we're going to have 2 basic models. We're going to have a user and post model, and it's going to be a relationship between them, which user going to have many posts. So it's one-to-many relationship. Okay, the next thing, we're going to run a Docker container with Postgres. You don't have to do this part. You can just install Postgres on your computer or just to use a cloud to connect to your Postgres database. And now we're going to change the database URL according to the Postgres database that I'm running in the container. So I'm changing here the name, the password, and the port is going to be the same. Alright, so now I want to check that the database is actually running, so we're going to run the command npx Prisma Studio to see our database. And you can see that we have the models over here, so which means that we are connected properly to our database. We have the posts, the post and the user models over here. And inside you can see actually the fields that we defined for the models. Okay, now I want to run my Apollo server. So in order to create the Apollo server, we're going to use new Apollo server, and we have to pass here type defs and resolvers in order to create this server. And I'm going to have a middleware of app.use / GraphQL, and it's going to use the Express middleware, and I'm going to pass the server that I just created. And down here, I'm going to console log the entry point for our GraphQL server. Okay, now let's go to our index.ts file in the GraphQL folder, and let's export the type defs and the resolvers from here. So for now, I'm just going to leave the query and the mutation empty for the resolver, and I'm going to define some types for our application. So I'm going to define a user over here for now, and we're going to leave the posts because I'm not going to define the post type at the moment. So we're going to define queries for user and users. And now I'm going to define also the resolvers. So basically we need a resolver for user query and a resolver for users query. For now, I'm just going to leave an empty functions like this. Let's go back to our index.ts root file, and let's import here the type defs and the resolvers that we created. All right, now you can see that the GraphQL server is running properly. And if we go to this link, we will have our entry point, and it's going to be a sandbox of GraphQL. And here you can actually do a lot of stuff. You can test your schema, you can run your queries and mutations, and actually here you can check everything that we just created. So let's try to run a query for users, and here you can see that I have to specify the fields that I need for the user. So let's say that we need an email and a username. And just for the demonstration, let's change the resolver to actually bring me an array of users. So I'm going to define an object here with a username and an email. And now when I run this query, I'm going to receive the array that the resolver is returning for me. Now, if I try to ask for a field that doesn't exist, so for example ID, I'm going to receive an error because it says that it cannot return a field that does not exist, and ID is not a nullable field. So basically, it's not possible to make this query at the moment because the resolver is not returning the ID. Okay, the next thing that I want to do is to move these type defs definitions that I created inside the type defs folder. So in this folder, I'm going to create a GraphQL file, which is going to be called user.graphql. And on the way, I'm going to make a post.graphql file. Now let's take all the type defs from this variable, and let's put them inside the GraphQL file. So now in order to use the types from the GraphQL file, I'm going to use a function from Node.js that is called readFileSync, and it's going to be imported from fs, and I'm going to import path from path. I'm going to create a variable called userTypes to get the directory, and I'm going to read this file and use it inside the string that I created earlier for type defs. Now I'm going to do the same thing for post.graphql. I'm going to read this file and I'm going to use it inside my type defs. Now we're going to create the resolvers. So we're going to create a user.resolver.ts file. And here we're going to have the user's resolver. And basically here we will have the query object, and we're going to have two functions, one for users and one for user. For now, we don't have the user service yet, so I need to comment this for now, but later we're going to use the user service to actually make the DB call and get the user information. Now inside our main GraphQL file, I'm going to import user resolver.query, and I'm going to spread it inside my resolver variable inside the query object. Now, just for fun, we're going to create also the mutation functions. I don't think that we are going to use them, but anyway, I'm going to show you that we can have a mutation object over here. And so now let's do the same thing for the mutation. So we're going to get the user resolver, and we're going to spread the mutation. Because we don't have any mutations inside our resolver, TypeScript is complaining. So we have to go to the resolver and create some mutation functions. All right, now we have 3 mutation functions: create user, update user, and delete user. And the next thing I want to talk about is about the posts field. So we're going to have an indication of what the user actually asking from the resolver. So we're going to create a utility function that is called extract selections. Basically what this function is going to do, it is going to loop through the fields that the client is asking, and it's going to return all the values that the client is asked for. This is going to be useful when we will decide in the user service if we want to get the posts from the DB. Now it's time to create our user service. So inside services, we're going to create a new file, user.service.ts. And here in the user service, we're going to have two functions. So we're going to export get users and get user. And as you can see, we're going to use this extract selection function that we created in our utils. And here I'm going to check if the user is asking for posts. So if posts are included, then I want to run a DB query that includes the posts. Otherwise, I don't want to run this query. I just want to find the users without the posts. So this is how we're going to improve our GraphQL performance server. So only when the user is asking for posts, then I want to include them in my DB query. And this is of course depending on the fields that the user is asking from the client. Now we can uncomment the services, so basically the user service, and we can return the real functions from the user service. Okay, this is a good time to test our real queries. So let's go back to our playground and let's ask for a query of users. Let's choose the fields that we want, and you can see that now I'm getting back a real database query. So now at the moment we don't have any users, so I'm getting empty array. Now let's add the posts to our user type. And when I add the posts, you can see that I define it as a post array. And if we go to the terminal, you see that I have this error unknown type post. That means that I didn't define the post type. So I cannot ask for post array. And this is why we have to now go to the post.graphql and define our types. Here are the types for the post.graphql file. So we're going to have a type of post. I'm going to have some queries, input and mutation. Now inside the index.ts, you can see that the post types are included in the type defs. And if we go back to the terminal now, you can see that the error is actually gone, because now we have the post type defined. All right, now inside our playground, you can see that I have an option for posts. When I query for users, I have option for posts, and I can ask for all the fields that are included in the posts. The next thing I want to do is to go to our Prisma Studio, and I want to create a demo user so we will have something to query from our database. So let's go to the user model and let's fill out all the info. Now we have this one user with the username of GraphQL Pro. And you can see that when I query for users, I'm getting back the user with the username of GraphQL Pro, and this user doesn't have any posts. Now let's query for all the other fields that this user have. So I can query for email and ID, and you can see that I'm getting back the fields that I request for. And now I can even delete the posts, and I can get only the fields related to this user without the posts. So you can see how flexible the GraphQL query actually is. Now let's create a post for this user. So I have to specify that this post belongs to the user that I just created. And let's save this post. Now let's try to query all the fields related to posts. So I can query for author ID, content, ID, and title. And you can see that in the result, I'm getting the post that I just created. Now to wrap up this session, let's create one mutation just for the example. So we're going to create a function in the service and we're going to call it create user. Now we have to create the interface for the create user input. So user input is going to receive email as a string and a username as a string, just as we defined in our input in the GraphQL schema. So now this function is going to receive this user input object, and we can actually destructure the fields from here. And now we're going to run the function of user.create to create the new user with the field that we supplied. Now remember that this resolver is getting the user back, so I need to return this created user to the client. So we're going to return created user. As you can see in the mutation, the create user is going to return a user type. Okay, now we are back in our resolver and we're going to create this mutation, and we're going to change this mutation create user. We're going to pass the parent, which we are not going to use, and the args. And I'm going to run this function create user with the email and username from args. Okay, it's time to test our create user function. So let's go back to our GraphQL sandbox and let's choose a mutation, and I'm going to choose create user mutation. You can see that I have this variable, this field input that I can define in our variables section at the bottom of the screen. So let's say that the input is going to be an object, and I'm going to pass here an email and a username. Okay, so we got some errors. So now let's try to figure out what is the GraphQL error. So you can see that I have an error of data.email is missing, and it is a required field. So we need to go back to our code and let's try to debug this issue. Alright, the first thing that I want to check is the user service. So let's try to console log the email and username over here in this create user function. Next, I want to check my resolver, so let's console log the args. And let's run this function one more time to see the logs. And as you can see, I have args, and I can already see the error because in my service the email and username are undefined. And this is because the args object contains an input object, and inside the input we have the username and the email. So the fix is pretty simple. We just need to destructure the input from args. So in our resolver, we're going to get input from args, and we're going to change what we pass to the create user. Now let's try this function one more time. Now it should actually work. So back in our sandbox, let's run this function. And now you can see that the user is created and we are getting back the user that I just created. Now if I run this function one more time, I'm going to receive an error from GraphQL because the email should be a unique field, and I cannot add in my database two users with the same email. Let's say that I can actually get the user that I just created. So now you can see that I have two users in my database, and one of them have posts, one of them doesn't have, and everything seems to work just fine. So I hope you enjoyed this little demonstration of our little GraphQL server. You can take this as a very nice boilerplate and you can build on top of that your schemas and types and resolvers, and everything is very scalable, everything is well organized for your project. So I hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe if you are new to my channel. Please like it if you liked it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys, and thank you for watching.